Those ICE people are in Chicago terrorizing Black Americans. So Black people, if you thought you were safe, you are not.
ICE just raided Chicago, and this time, it wasn't just immigrants they went after. Reports say even Black Americans were detained, right inside their own apartment buildings. Chicago is supposed to be a sanctuary city, a place where people are safe from deportation. But if that protection is fading, what does that mean for the rest of us? Because if ICE can show up there, then none of us are truly safe. A few days ago, officers from Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) arrived in Chicago, Illinois, a city long known for its complex relationship with federal immigration authorities. Chicago has earned a reputation as a sanctuary city, a term that signifies its efforts to limit cooperation between local law enforcement and federal immigration agencies. The goal behind sanctuary policies is not to obstruct the law, but to ensure that undocumented residents can live without constant fear of deportation simply for existing. These policies aim to encourage trust between immigrant communities and local institutions, allowing people to report crimes, send their children to school, or seek medical care without worrying that an everyday encounter with police could lead to being detained by ICE. However, sanctuary cities are not impenetrable fortresses. Their protections have limits. Federal agencies like ICE operate under national authority, meaning they can still enter such cities, conduct investigations, and, when deemed necessary, make arrests or detain individuals. Chicago may offer moral and political resistance to mass deportations, but it cannot legally stop the federal government from enforcing immigration law. The recent arrival of ICE officers was a stark reminder of that reality, a moment that unsettled many who thought the city's sanctuary status offered complete safety. According to reports, the ICE officers focused their attention on several apartments, buildings in specific neighborhoods known for their immigrant populations, while details remain somewhat unclear. Witnesses claim that agents entered residential complexes and began questioning individuals inside. Among those present were some Black American residents, people who were not immigrants but happened to live in the same community spaces. The sight of armed officers conducting checks stirred confusion and fear, blurring lines between who was being targeted and why. This incident raised important questions about race, citizenship, and perception. For decades, the intersection of Blackness and immigration in America has been misunderstood. Many assume that ICE's work only affects Latino or other non-Black immigrant populations. Yet, in a city as diverse as Chicago, immigration enforcement can easily touch communities of color across the spectrum. African and Caribbean immigrants, for instance, often live side by side with native-born Black Americans, sharing cultural spaces, churches, and neighborhoods. When raids occur in those areas, it's not always immediately clear who is being questioned for immigration status, and who is simply caught in the chaos. For Black Americans, moments like these carry a different kind of weight. The historical memory of being surveilled, profiled, and detained, whether by local police or federal agencies, runs deep. The presence of ICE in predominantly Black neighborhoods can evoke memories of other forms of state intervention that disproportionately impacted African American communities. Police raids during the Civil Rights era, COINTELPRO operations against Black activists, and even modern stop-and-frisk practices. While ICE's primary mandate is immigration enforcement, the optics of uniformed officers detaining people of color in public housing or low-income neighborhoods inevitably resonate with that painful history. Chicago itself is no stranger to these tensions. The city's immigrant communities, from Mexican and Central American families to African and Middle Eastern newcomers, often coexist in the same socioeconomic environments as working-class Black Americans. These shared spaces can create solidarity, but they can also amplify misunderstanding, especially when one group's legal vulnerability spills over into another's sense of safety. So when ICE arrived in Chicago, the impact rippled far beyond immigration law. It reignited conversations about who truly feels protected in America, and what sanctuary really means when federal power can override local intent. For immigrants, the raids were a reminder that paperwork and policy debates determine their freedom. For Black Americans living nearby, they were another example of how quickly law enforcement's reach can touch their lives, even when they've done nothing wrong. In the end, the incident wasn't just about one city or one agency, was a reflection of the broader American struggle to balance law, justice, and humanity. Chicago's sanctuary status may symbolize compassion, but its limits remind us that real safety often depends less on policy and more on how those policies are enforced in practice. The ICE raid, while brief, left behind a lingering unease feeling that even in places built on the promise of refuge, fear can still find its way to the door.
So word on the street is that apparently Monday night, ICE infiltrated an apartment complex in Chicago and detained a bunch of African American citizens. And everybody's acting shocked. And my thing is, since the beginning of this year, you can go back. I've been making videos about ICE and immigration, and I've had countless people under my comments, African Americans like myself, saying that doesn't affect us. Yes, it does.
Reports began circulating that several Black Americans were detained during the ICE operations, though whether these detentions were intentional, mistaken, or the result of broader confusion remains uncertain. The ambiguity surrounding what actually happened only fueled public concern. In an age where news spreads rapidly through social media, the story ignited immediate reactions across platforms, drawing attention not only from activists and journalists, but also from ordinary citizens who saw in it a troubling pattern. For many Black Americans, the incident felt like déjà vu, the idea of being wrongfully detained, mistaken for someone else, or treated with suspicion. Echoes generations of lived experience. From discriminatory policing to racial profiling, Black communities in the U.S. have long understood what it means to be questioned, watched, or apprehended simply for existing in certain spaces. The possibility that federal immigration agents, whose primary focus is supposed to be might inadvertently detain U.S.-born Black citizens struck a deep and painful chord. As the details spread, discussions quickly shifted beyond the immediate facts of the case and into the broader realm of solidarity and identity. Community leaders and social commentators began asking difficult questions. What does it mean for Black Americans to stand with immigrant populations when their own citizenship does not guarantee them safety or respect? Conversely, how can immigrant communities of African descent trust that their struggles will be seen as part of the same fight for racial justice? These debates illuminated a long-standing tension within the larger Black diaspora in America. On one side, there are calls for unity, a belief that all people of African descent, regardless of nationality, share a connected struggle against systems of racial inequity. On the other, there are voices that emphasize the distinct historical and cultural experiences of Black Americans whose families have endured centuries of enslavement, segregation, and systemic disenfranchisement in the United States. The ICE detentions, whether mistaken or not, placed those two perspectives in sharp relief. At the heart of the conversation was a simple but profound truth: solidarity cannot be assumed, it must be built. The calls for racial unity that emerged in response to the Chicago incident reflected a deep yearning among many Black Americans to find common ground, not only within their own community but also across global lines of identity. Yet, they also reflected frustration that racial solidarity is often only discussed during moments of crisis, rather than nurtured through consistent understanding and empathy. Some activists used the event to highlight how easily the boundaries between citizen and immigrant can blur in a society where race still dictates who is viewed as belonging. They pointed out that Black Americans, regardless of their immigration status, are often treated as outsiders in their own country. The sight of ICE detaining Black individuals, whether those people were foreign-born or native-born, became a metaphor for how fragile the concept of security can be when racial bias informs perception in many ways. The Chicago episode served as a mirror reflecting the broader state of race relations in America. It revealed how systemic mistrust and fragmented identities can complicate unity among people who, on the surface, share the same skin color. It reminded observers that Blackness is not a single, uniform experience. It encompasses African Americans, Africans, Afro-Caribbeans, Afro-Latinos, and countless others, each shaped by different histories but connected by similar challenges. And yet, amid the uncertainty and anger, something powerful happened. Dialogue. People began to talk honestly and publicly about the need for compassion and understanding within the Black community itself. Social media threads evolved into teachable moments, as individuals shared personal stories of being mistaken for immigrants, harassed by law enforcement, or dismissed when trying to explain their identity. Others used the moment to remind allies outside the community that racial justice cannot be achieved through fear or misinformation. It must be grounded in truth and mutual respect. The ICE detentions in Chicago may have lasted only a short time, but their ripple effects continue to move through conversations about race, belonging, and power. They showed how quickly a local enforcement action can become a national reflection point. compelling Americans to confront uncomfortable realities about who is seen as deserving of protection and who is not.
Black American that got on the internet and this app and refused to talk about what ICE was doing and what is going on in our country because I don't really care about the Hispanic community because they don't care about us. Which is BS in of itself, but that's a whole nother conversation. We told you that we would be next, right? And y'all didn't listen. And look. So this is a sign for everyone to get off their damn high horses and start caring about what is going on in your communities and in your nation. Whether or not is this happening to someone who looks like you. Simply because we are human.
Amid the growing wave of discussion, a young woman stepped into the online conversation, sharing her thoughts on the unfolding events in Chicago. Her tone was sharp, confident, and tinged with the kind of certainty that often accompanies social media debates. To many, it seemed as though she was treating the situation as a kind of gotcha moment, a chance to score rhetorical points, to say "I told you so," rather than to truly unpack the deeper human realities behind what had happened. In an era where opinions move faster than facts, her comments quickly became a focal point of attention, drawing both support and criticism. Her response reflected something that has become increasingly common in today's digital public square: the transformation of serious social issues into moments of online performance, on platforms where virality often trumps nuance. Tragedies and policy failures can easily become backdrops for personal branding or ideological points. Instead of focusing on the people affected, the families frightened by ICE's presence, the communities left anxious and uncertain. Participants in the discourse, including this young woman, seemed more interested in proving a political or cultural point. Her commentary touched on themes of hypocrisy and awareness, as if she were calling out perceived contradictions within the Black community's stance on immigration and racial justice. While her tone carried conviction, it lacked empathy. What could have been a moment to foster understanding turned instead into another fragment in the endless cycle of online argumentation. Her words underscored how difficult it has become to have meaningful conversations about race, citizenship, and belonging in spaces designed for speed and reaction rather than reflection. Still, her intervention wasn't entirely without value. It brought to the surface a larger question: how do people within marginalized communities critique one another's responses to oppression without tearing down the very solidarity they need to survive? Her stance, whether intentionally provocative or not, revealed a deep fracture that exists not only between different racial or national groups, but also within them. The Black experience in America is far from monolithic, and moments like these force that reality into public view. Some saw her words as bold honesty, an attempt to challenge complacency or call out selective outrage. Others viewed them as insensitive, dismissive of the pain that communities were processing in real time. What's clear is that her approach reflected a generational shift in how people engage with social justice discourse. Younger voices often speak with unfiltered confidence, shaped by platforms that reward brevity and confrontation. But that same bluntness, if not paired with compassion, can turn potential allies into adversaries. Her comments also exposed a deeper societal fatigue, the weariness that comes from years of seeing similar tragedies repeat without tangible change. When people feel powerless to alter systems of oppression, it can become tempting to focus instead on the optics of accountability, on calling out contradictions rather than addressing root causes. In that sense, her reaction mirrored a broader human impulse to make sense of chaos by finding someone to blame. The reaction to her comments was mixed. Some applauded her courage to say what others wouldn't, arguing that uncomfortable truths are necessary to move conversations forward. Others criticized her for oversimplifying a complex issue, accusing her of seeking attention rather than contributing insight. This split in perception highlights how polarized discourse around race and immigration has become, how even people who might share similar values can end up talking past one another, each convinced that their version of the truth is the most authentic. Ultimately, the young woman's gotcha moment became less about her specific words and more about what they represented. It illustrated how social media can amplify division while disguising it as dialogue. It also reminded observers that empathy is often the first casualty of digital activism. When discussions about justice and identity turn into competitions for moral superiority, the humanity of those affected, the immigrants facing deportation, the citizens living in fear, the families caught in uncertainty, can easily be lost. What the conversation needed, and what her comments lacked, was the humility to listen before speaking. The Chicago incident was not just a headline or a political talking point, it was a lived experience for real people navigating the fragile space between legality and belonging. Her reaction, while reflective of a wider trend, showed how crucial it is to approach such moments not as opportunities to win arguments, but as chances to build understanding. Only through that kind of engagement can true solidarity and progress begin to take root.
Could be weaponized against Black Americans, white people would have been doing it. Have you not seen the videos of the Karens on the blood clot phone calling the police and using the police as their personal lynch mob and as their personal security when a Black person is not doing something that they want them to do, when a Black person is inconveniencing them, when Black people are experiencing joy, when little Black kids are having lemonade stands, when Black people are just walking down the street in neighborhoods that that have not identified themselves and showed them their freedom papers, they call the police. You do not think that they would not be calling ICE to get us deported by the mother bros if they could? Let's keep it real. If ICE could be weaponized against Black Americans to send us somewhere, these Caucasian people calling ICE on us.
Recently, a discussion sparked online after a woman named Amy Boki commented on the ICE raids in Chicago. Amy, who identifies as a liberal and whose last name suggests Ghanaian heritage, spoke about the situation using we as though representing Black Americans. Some listeners took issue with this, arguing that, while her African background connects her to the broader Black diaspora, it doesn't necessarily give her the same cultural or political perspective as Black Americans, whose families have been in the United States for generations. The speaker emphasized that this isn't about gatekeeping or rejecting Pan-African unity, it's about recognizing that certain conversations are deeply rooted in the lived experiences of specific communities. He compared it to being in another country, such as Uganda, and trying to speak authoritatively about issues that directly affect Ugandan citizens. Even with good intentions, there's a cultural boundary between observation and representation. He then referenced Tariq Nish, who addressed the growing social media conversation about ICE operations in Chicago. Tariq pointed out that while ICE reportedly detained several Black individuals, most of those affected were likely immigrants, not foundational Black Americans, FBA. According to him, some political groups, particularly those aligned with the Democratic Party, might be using this incident to blur distinctions between immigrant communities and Black Americans born in the U.S., potentially as a way to influence political alignment or evoke sympathy. Tariq argued that foundational Black Americans are citizens by birthright and thus not subject to deportation laws. He suggested that fear-based narratives are being spread to create confusion and guilt, encouraging Black Americans to rally behind causes that don't directly pertain to them. He also reminded his audience that police harassment and government surveillance are not new experiences for Black Americans. From COINTELPRO operations in the civil rights era to more recent incidents of racial profiling, such realities have long existed. Tariq even recalled being swatted live on national television incident that illustrated how normalized such harassment has become. The broader point was this: while solidarity across racial and ethnic lines is valuable, it must be grounded in mutual understanding, not pressure or guilt. Foundational Black Americans and immigrant Black communities often face different challenges shaped by citizenship status, culture, and history. For us citizens, even if detained by ICE, deportation isn't a legal outcome. There's simply nowhere for them to be deported to. True unity, the speaker implied, comes not from merging every struggle into one, but from respecting the unique experiences within the global Black community and standing together where those experiences intersect. A young woman made a powerful observation that caught people's attention. If it were truly possible for ICE to deport Black Americans to Africa, wouldn't that have already happened? Her point struck a chord that challenged the fear-driven idea that Black citizens in the U.S. could suddenly face deportation. After all, as the speaker noted, there have always been individuals, both white and Black, who hold prejudice or personal grudges. If deportation were a real option, some people would have undoubtedly tried to use it as a weapon long ago. This reasoning highlights why such claims don't hold up. The notion that ICE could target and remove Black citizens is misleading, often used to stir unnecessary fear or manipulate political emotions. Instead of promoting solidarity, these narratives can divide communities and push people toward alliances that may not serve their interests. Speaker went on to say that while cooperation between different ethnic and immigrant groups sounds ideal, it often falls short in reality. Many communities, including some within the broader Latino and Hispanic populations, have historically not prioritized Black American struggles, and that sentiment has been voiced openly over decades. The truth, he argued, is that solidarity must be mutual to have meaning. From a practical standpoint, Latino and Hispanic communities now represent a larger demographic and economic force in the U.S., encompassing groups like Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, and Colombians. They hold their own political and cultural power and are capable of advocating for their own causes. Therefore, the speaker suggested, Black Americans shouldn't feel compelled to shoulder battles that others aren't willing to share. He ended by reiterating a broader message. Each community must first secure its own stability before lending its strength elsewhere. Black Americans have distinct challenges that require focus and unity from within. As for those facing immigration issues, their most prominent voices, like popular Latino artists and leaders, should take the lead in their fight. Another episode of the Celebrity Junk, reminding his audience to stay informed, think critically, and keep the discussion going.